Peace, peace, peace. What's up? This is the Isness. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me. I am here to explain about the Indians of Louisiana and to give salute on how they never took their crown. So I just want to premise this with some information here. All right. All right. So this letter was sent to George Washington in 1789. And I just want to preface this that there was a certain group of people here in the 1700s that were called the Aboriginals. So this says, to the Moravian Society for Propagating the Gospel, New York, 15 of August, 1789. Gentlemen, I receive with satisfaction the congratulations of your society and the brethren congregations in the United States of America. For you may be persuaded that the approbation and good wishes of such a peaceable and virtuous community cannot be indifferent to me. You will also be pleased to accept my thanks for the treaties which you presented, and to be assured of my patronage in your laudable undertakings. So basically, this particular secret society made some treaties or presented some treaties to George Washington before he was inaugurated. And he is promising that he will patronize them. Okay, so in proportion, as the general government of the United States shall acquire strength by duration, which means that they will get stronger with time, it is probable they may have it in their power to extend a salutary influence to the Aborigines in the extremities of their territory. So I'm going to read that again. In proportion to the general government of the United States shall acquire strength by duration, it is probable they may have it in their power to extend a salutary influence to the Aborigines in the extremities of their territory. So, in other words, be nice to those Aborigines and give them some role in the government. In the meantime, it will be a desirable thing for the protection of the Union to cooperate as far as the circumstances may conveniently admit with the disinterested endeavors of your society to civilize and Christianize the savages of the wilderness. Under these impressions, I pray Almighty God to have you always in his holy keeping. Now, this particular letter could be looked into. There's two different people. There's a group that he's asking to extend power to, and those are called the Aborigines. And it also seems like there's another group that people are trying to Christianize called the savages of the wilderness. Under these impressions, I pray, Almighty God, to have you always in his holy keeping. Washington. So there's a certain group called the Aborigines, and for some reason, the Native Americans never bring particular people up. And I'm wondering why. So let's get into my presentation. And all right, let's get to where we need to go. And what I'm going to do now is talk about um, the people of Louisiana. Now, we are told that we are not from here, but I am want to pay tribute and to take a closer look at the people of Louisiana who um, continue their tradition of being quote unquote Black Indians.
What was your first Mardi Gras experience? In New Orleans, there are two. The one you see and the one you experience. And when you experience our Mardi Gras, you know exactly what it is. Ancestors congregating in the present through chants and dance, passing on words and movements that are as old as time itself. Although some may think they know what they are seeing, most don't. This, what you are seeing, can only be experienced.
I sold all night long.
Somebody got a soul, soul, soul.
I saw a march, I break a dong.
Somebody got a soul, soul, soul.
Hooray, what they say?
Somebody got a soul, soul, soul.
I'm gonna kill him dead.
Somebody got a soul, soul, soul. I'm a
I'm
little bitty boy with a feather in my head.
Somebody got soul.
Say early that morning, that's what I said.
Somebody got soul.
Hooray on the battlefield.
Somebody got soul.
Say Mardi Gras morning, I'm dressed to kill.
Somebody got soul.
I'm a little bitty boy from way downtown.
Somebody got soul.
I make no home, make no bow.
Somebody got soul.
So, what was your first Mardi Gras experience?
So my oldest memory of culture in New Orleans would be Mardi Gras 2007. I was actually on Louisiana, kind of just watching everybody that came by, speaking, seeing people that they hadn't seen in a while. And that's when I saw my uncle and my cousins coming down the street. And at that point, they came up and I knew that's when I wanted to mask. That was the point where I really got introduced to the culture and to really what New Orleans was.
Well, I got into masking because I was fascinated with the Indians when I met them on Mardi Gras back in the 1970s, the early 70s. I was a young boy and we went out to see the Indians with my parents, and watching them out there that day was created a fantasy in my mind that I wanted to participate in. However, I never started masking Indians. I was well in late in age because I never knew anybody to ask to mask with them. Right after Hurricane Katrina, I went to Big Chief Casby and saw that there was a potential for the gentrification of our culture and people coming into New Orleans and changing the dynamics of the city. And I thought that being a lawyer, I can lend a voice to the culture to be able to help it sustain itself in the city of New Orleans. So I started sewing and started speaking out against some of the issues that was coming into New Orleans, the police brutality of the Indians, and also with the potential changing of the landscape of the cultural identity of New Orleans, and started speaking out against that. And that's how I first started masking India.
Down here, we refer to this as the culture. That includes second lines, brass bands, and anything that honors the past while moving on into the future. As Wendell Pierce has said, culture is the intersection between life and death and how you deal with it.
My name is Terrence Williams Jr., and I'm the Big Chief of Black Hawk Hunters Mexican Indian tribe. When I was in 8th grade, I was researching. I came across Chief Blackhawk, and I read about how he was a fearless leader and did anything to make sure that his tribe was okay and safe, and make sure everybody was happy. And it just happened to be like some of the qualities that people seem to associate with me. I was like, oh, I'm gonna name my tribe that after him.
How did you get the mask?
Well, first off, my big cousin, Eric Smith, was masking with a tribe. And my mom was looking for ways to help my brother, Tyrell, who's the game flag of my tribe, cope with his ADHD.
Masking has helped me by teaching me perseverance, patience, because I gotta sit there and sew the stuff in order to make it. And when I used to get frustrated, I used to know that I could come to the table, sit down, and sew. Because like the 1, 2, 3, you know what I'm saying, counting sheeps, all that didn't really help me. But the one thing that really did was sitting down at the table sewing.
Tyrell was first diagnosed with ADHD when he was 6 years old. So I know, like, it's, some people feel like there's no such thing as ADHD and it's just a myth. And some people feel that it's just something that they want to diagnose black kids with. But actually, ADHD is real. It's a real thing. Some people will call it ADHD. Some people just say, oh, this child is bad. So I feel like it helps him because he uses it as a coping strategy. Like, he's able to it's like meditation, because even with ADHD they try to give you different ways to cope. When he would go sit down and sew, it helped. And don't get me wrong, it's not always peaches and cream. He would get frustrated, but he wanted it so bad, and it was something that he looked forward to. He persevered through whatever obstacles that came to when it came down to sewing and putting his suit together.
So that first year, he masked. They asked me if I wanted to mask when I was 7, and a little bit immature, I was like, "Nah, I'm not wearing pink. I'm not wearing all those feathers. I'm not wearing all that long hair. I didn't want to do that." So I was like, "I'll just sit on the side and I'll watch." But that year, I also learned how to sew as well to help out with him. So that year, I was playing the tambourine behind the chief, watching everything. Without the suit on, of course, you see everything differently. You see how the flags meet, the spies meet, how the chiefs meet, how the wilds meet. So after sitting out that year and watching everything, I was like, all right, I'm gonna give it a try. So my first year, I came out as a spy boy and I sewed my own suit by myself. So after that first year, I was like, oh, this is nice. I'm gonna keep doing it. And I'm gonna actually look into the reasoning of why I'm doing it as well.
I think one thing that all people should appreciate is how annoyed and disgusted Native people get when anyone dresses like us for any reason, period, ever. Now, motivations for that are definitely vary person to person as motivations to doing anything. But in general, Native people are utterly disgusted when anyone ever dresses like us. And that's because there's such a history of mockery and dressing like us, such a history of white portrayals of us. Um, I think with Mardi Gras Indians, many of them are, in fact, of indigenous ancestry. And if that is a way of expressing the person's indigenous ancestry, I think that's a different.
There's one misconception that this gentleman just said. He was saying that these people are dressing like them as the Native Americans, but really the quote unquote Native American is dressing like them. Um, they were the culture that was here before, just as you might see Fat Joe or someone partake in hip hop right now. They are partaking in the culture of the Black American, and the Black American is the Indian. And he somewhat acknowledges that by saying this is their culture, but he did it half-heartedly.
Interpretation from, say, a white person dressing up in Native clothing. Also, the outfits have a Native element, but they're also obviously influenced by African clothing in a way that's not just Native clothing. I think another interesting thing is that.
Okay, so he's saying that this is African clothing without any evidence of that. Like I said, this is American clothing, and if you look at the past, people aren't saying that they're African.
We the Creole Wild West and we don't know how. I woke up early Mardi Gras morning, ran a herd of buffalo to a gumbo city. I had a big old gang and every one of them was pretty. They had 100 soldiers jam against a mountain wall.
If you listen to this, it's almost like it's rhyming. It's like an early form of rap. I'm sure that he didn't just make this up. This is what was happening. This rhyming and rhythmic speaking is one of the first where you can see it has an early rap influence or hip hop influence.
Before the sun went down, I had killed them all. I killed 98 before I escaped. Got mad, thought about what they were trying to do. I come back and got the last two. Mighty cootie fire you. Mighty cootie fire you.
That almost sounds like church. So I want to go into something else that reminds me of church. Remnants of, and this is all the New Orleans Indian. Of course, I'm having internet connection problems.
Young and old are encouraged to participate in the dance. Tribal dance. Young and old are encouraged to participate in the dance. Tribal dances are usually conducted by men. A practice takes place in a neighborhood bar on Sunday after church hours. It is more than a practice. It's a celebration of life. This is the dance of the chiefs.
Now, this particular dance is somewhat, we've all seen it before. We've seen it in the churches. You've seen that. That's your praise break. That is your Holy Ghost. That's what the grandmas used to do at church on Sunday with that tambourine.
This is a spy boy. the tribal scout. New Orleans. In the 1880s, a group of young men decided to mask on Carnival Day as Indians. This was one of the earliest expressions of respect to North American Indians by people of African descent. After the costumes are worn, they are destroyed. New ones must be created for the next year. The living spirit of the Black Indians is expressed in the style of costume. An Indian costume may weigh from 60 to 100 pounds. Chief Montana arranges the stones in abstract patterns that are three-dimensional.
Okay, so what I really want to do is go into why everyone isn't doing that in the United States. And I just want to bring this out. And there's this letter. Basically, there was a court of Indian offenses. So they have black courts, basically, in the old days. And how do you know that it was courts for us? Is because, as you just saw, that is our culture. The dancing, the rhyming. So I'm just going to read a little bit as evidence so you can understand, to kind of illustrate what the Department of Interior did. So this is establishing the courts. You know, we ask ourselves, you know, why is it that the police seem like harsher with black folks? You know, they could have a broken tail light and die. The police to shoot them or something. Meanwhile, a mass murder of another race will just get arrested, because these particular courts and police officers were specifically created to govern us, the Indian. All right. So the Department of Interior, Office of Indian Affairs. Here's its seal. Oh, there's the seal. All right. So this is the rules. Like I said, there was a court. They created the police system and the courts to govern the Indians. And that's only one group of people, because the people who are calling themselves Native Americans now govern themselves. All right. So the Department of Interior, Office of Indian Affairs, Washington, 1983. Sorry about that. It says, I desire to call your attention to what I regard as a great hindrance to the civilization of the Indians, the continuance of the old heathensome dances. I just showed you the dances, such as the sun dance that I just showed, which we usually would see on Sunday. It looks like they brought it into the church. Seems like it would have been a sun dance. The scalp dance we'll see a little bit later. When I go back into the New Orleans Indians as they line each other up. And then there's a war dance, which is characterized by the sea. And that is also the bravado dances that you see the men do. These dances are feasts, as they are sometimes called, like Mardi Gras. They ought, in my judgment, be discontinued. And if the Indians now supported by the government are not willing to discontinue them, the agent should be instructed to compel and discontinuance. So basically, if the government gave you a little bit of money, helps you out, gave you some meat, some hog or something, you were told to, they had jurisdiction over you, just like if you get food stamps, they could tell you not to buy soda. Okay. So these feasts and dances are not social gatherings for the amusement of these people, but on the contrary, are intended and calculated to stimulate the warlike passions of the young warriors of the tribe. So let me show you a young warrior.
I'm the flag boy. I'm the one they want to see that morning that can't be beat. I sold everything from the feathers on my head to the Nikes on my feet.
That's that rhyming. And this is the dances, the scalp dance, the war dance that they're saying is so bad and that they're being terrible.
I walk from Chapatoulas to Second and D. I walked to Shakespeare Park. They didn't want to see me. I walked to Washington and LaSalle. I raised hell.
It's your war dance.
When I put on this suit on Mardi Gras morning, brand new, I feel like I'm a warrior almost. Like I'm ready to take on any Indian who approach me. One of the things that makes you warrior to me is that, you know, I know I have to live and die here. Man, like I've gone to other Mardi Gras Indians funerals. I went to.
Okay, so let's get back to this particular thing. So we saw what the young dancers, the young warriors look like. And so these feasts and dances are not social gatherings for the amusement of these people, but on the contrary, they're intended and calculated to stimulate the warlike passions of the young warriors of the tribe. And as we saw earlier, the little young guy, he saw the Indians and he was like, I want to do that. So that's all it was. He wanted to participate in the ceremony. At each feast, the warrior recounts his deeds of daring, boasts of inhumanity in the destruction of his enemies and the treatment of his female captives in language that ought to shock even a savage ear. The audience assents approvingly to his boast of falsehood, deceit, theft, murder, and rape. And the young listener is informed that this and this only is the road to fame and renown. The result of the demoralization of the young are incited to emulate the wicked conduct of their elders without a thought that it is so, in so doing they violate any law, but on the contrary, with the conviction that in so doing they are securing for themselves an enduring and deserved fame among their people. Active measures should be taken to encourage all feasts and dances of this character I have mentioned. So this is the United States discouraging what we see the people in Louisiana who were able to continue. So let's take a look at another one. And we're going to see how people were stood around and watched. This is 2010.
Let the sun shine. Tell the big chief. His son is mine. Have me go home. Don't stand in my shadow.
This is that rhyming. This is that war talk that they talking about.
Don't stand in my shadow. I'm smart boy for walking down. Go get my big chief. You tell my big chief I'm ready. Woman. Woman. Where's my big chief? Where's my big chief? Let the sun shine. Let the sun shine. Keep it roll. Keep it roll. Keep it roll. Keep it roll. Can you see me now? Can you see me now? Come on! Come on! Come on down, Jack! Come on! Way uptown, make no way!
Y'all, this is beautiful. I ain't even gonna lie.
Pick your head up, shake my hand at me. Pick your head up, shake your hand at me. Pick your head up. Pick your head up. Pick your head up. Big Chief, Bob. Pick his head up. Let me see the picture.
We see the young people who the United States was scared that would want to do the same thing. They would want to be like their big chief up there. They would want to emulate that, so they banned it.
I'm the spy boy. Wild red flame. What's your name? I'm the wild red flame. Spy boy. Way uptown. Wild red flame. I'm the prettiest spy boy this side of uptown. I've been uptown all my life. I'm the spy boy. I got the golden crown. I got the golden crown. Achiwa. Gucci man. Hey man, Derek, you need a big chief. Derek, you need a big chief with a head on your head. That's that dude right
All right, so you have an idea. And so let's go back into this guy who's, as these people, they ain't talking about nothing about Africa, but this particular documentary is a government documentary, and they're going to try to relate it to Africa.
And I think this is a point of contact, is that many Mardi Gras Indians, every time there's some sort of indigenous activism, whether it be Standing Rock protests, either at Standing Rock in North Dakota, or now motivations for that are definitely vary person to person as motivations to doing anything. But in general, Native people are utterly disgusted when anyone ever dresses like us. And that's because there's such a history of mockery and dressing like us, such a history of white portrayals of us. I think with Mardi Gras Indians, many of them are, in fact, of indigenous ancestry. And if that is a way of expressing the person's indigenous ancestry, I think that's a different interpretation from, say, a white person dressing up in Native clothing. Also, the outfits have a Native element, but they're also obviously influenced by African clothing in a way that's not just Native clothing. I think another interesting thing is that, and I think this is a point of contact, is that many Mardi Gras Indians, every time there's some sort of indigenous activism, whether it be Standing Rock protests, either at Standing Rock in North Dakota or similar protests here, Mardi Gras Indians always join in solidarity with what we might traditionally identify as indigenous people. And that's a big point of contact. Every time I've ever talked with Mardi Gras Indians, they're very supportive of learning about indigenous culture and supportive of indigenous causes. I think many indigenous people who want to understand Mardi Gras Indians should maybe talk with them, and vice versa. I don't think that of Mardi Gras Indians as adversaries of indigenous people, definitely strong allies, and also people of indigenous ancestry. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Masking Indian as we do it in New Orleans is an African culture. It has its roots in Africa, and it was carried on in New Orleans Orleans because of the Black Code or Code de Noir, which was the French law at the time. And the French law required the slave masters to give their slaves freedom on Sundays to practice whatever cultural identity, whatever things that they wanted. And the slaves would assemble at a place later to be called Congo Square. And at that Congo Square, the cultural exchange of all the Africans who were slaves was allowed to manifest itself there. And that was the origins of the Mardi Gras Indian. Paying homage is an ancient African tradition of paying homage to something or someone who has aided you in your way of life in a particular period of time. And so when you hear people say we pay homage to the Native Americans in the Black masking culture, what we're actually doing is expressing our appreciation for some of their help in allowing us to run away to their camps in those places.
I think they both are represented well in the culture. Our drums, for instance, the drums is actually part of African culture. If you look at our beadwork, the beading style is actually African, but the portraits that we portray on the suit is more of a native plain Indian, or traditionally, rather. Nowadays, we represent other things as well. Some people may represent something that's significant in their life, just a particular time of the world that we're going through, and they might want to represent that. So you tell your story through your suit. So, but the way we started telling that story is actually a mixture of African and Native American. So I guess it says equally yoked, actually.
I think any points of confusion, though, require conversations, and they require conversations with Indigenous people where Indigenous people feel free to voice their concerns, and vice versa. Many Indigenous people consider it offensive, and when it comes to whether or not something should be offensive to Indigenous people, only the opinions of Indigenous people matter. No one else's opinion matters whatsoever regarding what Indigenous people should find offensive. However, I think fewer Indigenous people would be less offended by Mardi Gras Indians if they knew more about the backstory, if they knew more about the Indigenous ancestry of those individuals, and if they knew more about the history between African and Indigenous peoples in this city, which is a deeply intertwined, interwoven history that cannot be separated.
In our culture, we find those who have aided us along our way, and we do something to celebrate them in our masking. And Big Chief Rabi wrote in his book that the, the imagery of the Native Americans that we see on our suits came about back in the early 1900s because that was the images they started to see in the coloring books of Indians. So they got those images and put on their suits as a way to pay homage to the Indians, the Native Americans who actually helped them along the way to freedom for some of their ancestors.
My tribal nation, we're probably originally from Mexico, or at least we have many loan words from that area in our traditional language, Ishakwe. The first ever French depiction of Indigenous people in the city, Alexander de Botton's painting from 1735, has a member of our tribe visiting. So we do have a long history of trade and diplomacy with this area and very long history of relationships with the area nations. As far as our relationship to New Orleans, something I will often talk about is that New Orleans does not exist. There is a place called Bulbancha, though, where we are sitting right now. And in Bulbancha, we have a long history of it. As far as our relationships with African Americans, our tribe has traditionally been very willing to incorporate people of African ancestry into our tribe to intermarry with them. I am of Indigenous and African ancestry and European ancestry. I see no contradiction in that. That might be different slightly ethnically than my Ishak ancestors, but they called themselves Ishak because their ancestors did, and so do I. There's no shame to be Indigenous and African. There's no contradiction. Black is beautiful. Kushmel Pistaksush, as we say in our language. Black lives matter. And we have a long history of intermarriage that forms the basis of the Creole population in Louisiana. Almost all Creole people are of mixed indigenous, European, and African origin. Also, the vast majority, I'm sure, of indigenous identified people in Louisiana have some African ancestry. Whether they are proud of that or not, I'm very proud of it.
Before the ripples of the COVID-19 pandemic began to take hold at the beginning of 2020, Mardi Gras happened. It'd be the last time we would be able to embrace one another as a community, and the last time in 2020 that the Mardi Gras Indians would be able to display their culture to their community. Even though time has passed and technology has progressed, the ways of our ancestors are still practiced from year to year. No matter what changes around the culture, the practices stay the same. Sewing. Every year, Mardi Gras Indians sew their own suit by hand, and every year, they incorporate something that matters to them on a spiritual level. This could be a civil rights legend who helped to bring awareness to the plight of the ongoing struggle of being Black in America, like MLK. Or someone who represents them on a personal and spiritual level, like Haile Selassie. Or sewing could be a dedication to the most important person in all our lives, someone who nurtured us to become the person we are. The person who was always there to cheer for us when we're right and scold us when we're wrong. Our mamas.
You're not gonna see that. You're not gonna see that. You done? Yeah. Where's Fat Man? Fat Man! Fat Man! Come here. Taro, come here. No, y'all. Oh, I gotta talk to y'all. Okay, come here. Fat Man, come here. Look. I'm proud of you, Fat Man. You're pretty. You're pretty.
Yeah, I'm.
Look, look, listen. I'm extremely proud of y'all, alright? Fat Man, you coming out on the first spot for the first time. You got this, okay? Just like you practice. You got it. What are you?
Spot boy.
What spot boy? Pretty spot boy.
Pretty
Taro, you do your job, alright? I love y'all. I love both of y'all, alright? Come on. Come here. Alright, for Indian Red, Fat Man, I call you out when you're almost done. You don't go to mom and give her a hug and tell her how much you're thankful for her, okay? Because it's
what?
that you're thankful for her, okay?
Say I love you.
All right. Remember, when we do here, you go to mama's, tell her how much you love her, because your suit is for her, all right? Your suit is dedicated to her. Same for you, all right?
And you?
Yeah, me, of course. Mm-hmm. You hear me, though?
Take a look at a wild man. Wild man. He's the wild man of a nation. So and he won't
down on that ground, because I love to hear them call. Take a look at a gay flag, gay flag, gay flag of a nation. The whole I agree, and he won't bow down on that ground, because I love to hear them call my Indian race. I said, Mardi, Cootie got fire. Summer down to the ground. And I'm gonna take my cake about town. Say I am the the reason why we did this. I love you. I love you, Mom. The reason for all of this. This is why we dedicate our shoes to you. You're the reason why we do everything. You help us. You push us through everything. You show up to everything. You make the impossible possible, Mom. I love you.
Indigenous and African people here have often lived in the same neighborhoods. Very often the case in Louisiana that the oldest free neighborhood of African Americans in a city is also based on the native village. That's true in Lafayette, Louisiana. That's true of the Treme here in our city. That's true of many other neighborhoods around Louisiana. African and Native American people are heavily intermarried. What I think sometimes happens is that Native aspects of people get erased when they're intermarried with African people. And that's because in our society, unfortunately, through racist ideals, people see African blood as a contaminant, such that if you have African ancestry, you're no longer Native American. But many prominent people who are African American are also Native American, and people sometimes forget that. People such as Jimi Hendrix, people such as Mildred Loving, people such as Crispus Attucks, the first casualty of the American Revolutionary War, had one African American parent and one Native American parent. He's no more African American than he was Native American. But you really never really see people very often talking about his Native American ancestry.
Growing up, like I said, let's say 30 years ago, when I was young, very, very young, because I ain't that old, y'all. But like the city embraced all culture. It did. And nowadays you can see that changing. Just, I'll give you, for instance, the Mardi Gras Indian culture. At one point, the entire neighborhood would back the culture with whatever it was, just to follow that tribe, follow their chief, represent that chief, because each chief represent each neighborhood. So the neighborhood represent that chief right back. And nowadays, like I said, that neighborhood is not there no more. Chief is there, but the neighborhood is gone. So now you don't have the same, camaraderie. You don't have the same representation. So the feel is different.
Before Katrina, the city was 67% African American. It's now 59% African American. And although the Black population has rebounded every year since 2006, as the city has recovered, in the last 2 years, we've seen a net decrease in the total number of Black folks living in the city by about 1,500.
I think the first thing that we need to shift when we talk about gentrification is that it's not a residential phenomenon. In the research I do, I look at gentrification as a project of systemic racial oppression. But every Black community doesn't get gentrified. It's generally a multi-generational process that begins with divestment in Black communities. Right. First of all, we have to understand that the majority of Black neighborhoods are strategically situated in areas that have the worst conditions. The divestment over time is to ultimately push Black people out of the city centers, right? Because a lot of the communities we're located in are done for work purposes. You know, you're close to downtown, you're close to the lake, or you're close to whatever corporate hub had you working. When the work disappears, now corporations, with the help of the government, want to remove the people. And when I say every Black community doesn't get gentrified, only the Black communities that are close to something of value, whether it be a sports stadium, whether it be something like the French Quarter, whether it be a lake or something popular or attractive, you know, and that's what kind of determines whether or not corporate interest sees the opportunity for profit by essentially eliminating Black people from a space. The issue is that space has value because of the Black people and the culture they bring to it.
Some of what we see happening in terms of gentrification is actually because of people who don't live in New Orleans who are buying second properties in the city. Our architecture is so attractive and it's so relatively inexpensive compared to San Francisco or New York that to buy a $250,000 historic home
More of Black culture while simultaneously removing the people that produce and create the culture.
Our culture here has been and still is being made from being oppressed and has always been monetized from those outside of the city and outside of the culture. During times of disaster and in the immediate following of it, a question is always heard. If there are no Indians on St. Joseph's night, no brass band on Frenchman, no crawfish bread while trombone shorty plays on a Sunday afternoon in late April, what is the purpose of being here? If this is considered, more people would understand that New Orleans is more than a city for a good time and is a place where years of cultural diversity have combined into a kaleidoscope of music, food, and people. If the culture is examined, more people would understand the years of different cultures coming together and learning from one another for over 300 years. New Orleans is more than laissez-montrer relais.